Malware. In this nugget, we'll be talking about malware. We'll talk, first of all, about something that's not directly related to malware at all, and that is just some various research items for you. These don't really have a big topic of their own, and they're kind of miscellaneous. I wanted to put them in here before I forgot about them, so we just start with that. But then we'll talk here about rootkits and kind of get an overview of what rootkits do. They're extremely dangerous, among other things, because they're very difficult to detect and to remove. There's also Trojans. We'll talk about what those are and how they can infect your system and how other malware also spreads. We'll talk about how some of that malware can be concealed. That's one of the dangers of things such as rootkits, is because they're cleverly concealed sometimes, and even your antivirus software might not be able to pick them up. And we'll talk about ways to protect yourself as well against malware. I'm a little surprised at myself because I've never been a fan of horror movies. I'm really still not. However, there's an AMC television show called The Walking Dead, which is about zombies that will run around and try to kill, human beings. And it's kind of interesting because all the zombies used to be real people. They used to be a real boy, so to speak. And they got some kind of a virus or an infection or something, and it killed their brains until the point where only their basic motor functions work. And from that point forward, they really just kind of become hunters, and they look for live humans to actually try to cannibalize. I know it's kind of gross. Sorry about that. But I actually got kind of addicted to this show. It's actually got tremendously good storylines and really, really good acting in it. I thought it was going to be kind of cheesy. It's just really not. Anyway, it's kind of like that with some of the things we'll be looking at in this nugget. We're looking at rootkits and Trojans and viruses, and many of them, initially at least, look like they're real people or real useful programs. But once they get installed, they could turn your computer into a zombie, meaning that it could be controlled by others, for example. And I know on the television show, in order to get rid of the zombie, you have to shoot it in the head. I don't think you're going to be able to shoot your computer in the head or in the monitor or something like that. But we will hopefully find some ways to at least avoid getting these zombies installed on your computer. All right, now before we get started here, I wanted to point out a few additional resources that just didn't really have enough space on their own or really require their own whiteboard, but collectively I thought I'd kind of collect some miscellaneous research resources. First of all, don't forget that there is the study guide that I'll have available for you up on nuggetlab.com. It may change its appearance a little bit from what you see here, but all the content will be there. For example, in this nugget we're going to be talking about viruses and Trojans and rootkits, and so here we'll talk about some of those items there, and that's just a study guide for you that's available. And you may need to get a good look at some of those topics and put them in your brain before you take the exam. Also, there's exploitdb.com. I've talked about that before. Just keep going back there for the most recent exploits, especially as you try to attack more current Windows operating systems. Also, Google is always a great research resource. It's just such a good tool. Almost any question you can think of right now, any kind of an exploit you want to perform, if you Google for it, very likely you're going to find something out there that you'll be able to find useful. Now, here's something you really need to make use of. Use virtual machines. That's what I do for all of my hacks that you've seen. And this is so useful and so important for a couple of different reasons. Number one, you don't want to destroy an actual working production machine. And you don't want to hack yourself and put some kind of a rootkit or something like that on your own machine, because chances are that somebody else out there on the internet might be able to detect that it's there and be able to do a backdoor into that Trojan and then take control of your own personal computer. So just use virtual machines for these sorts of things. And when you're not actually using them, shut them down or pause them or something like that so that they can't be exploited while you're not around. Also, use these, a lot of hackers I know, in fact, use these for untrusted sites and for any of their own web browsing. They just launch some version of Windows very often, and they don't actually even browse for the internet in the browser that's included in their host operating system. They just do everything, even their personal email, all of that, through virtual machines. And then if it does so happen that you can get a virus or some kind of a Trojan or something else that's difficult to fix, you can always go back to snapshots, because most virtualization software out there will allow you to go back to a previous point in time. For example, let me go to this. Here's just my I'm running VMware Workstation, as you can see here, and then I've got my Ubuntu machine, and I've got my Windows server over here, and then I've got my Ubuntu machine. But if something went horribly wrong, while I was doing some kind of an exploit or something, actually, let me show you this way. I could go up to my snapshots, and you can see I've done a lot of different snapshots here. And I do usually create a baseline snapshot, at least one or more, that just takes me back to a known good scenario. Sometimes I'll do something before I perform a metasploit. For example, here I did a metasploit in our last nugget. Well, in case something went horribly wrong there, I wanted to go back to a known good situation there. So that's kind of the idea there behind the virtualization. It'll help to keep you safe. Also, make sure that you get clearance if you're in a corporate environment before you do any kind of research. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you don't need probably clearance to just use Google or to do any other kind of research or probably even to watch these particular videos. However, as you start to search around the internet and look for various exploits and hackers' websites and things like that, I have to give you fair warning. A lot of them are funded or sponsored by pornographic websites. So if you are doing research, and I'm holding up these giant air quotes right now around research, if you're doing research at work, be sure that, number one, it's legit research so that if anybody traces it back to you, you can say, yes, it was from a hacker's website and I needed to find this information for a specific purpose. And number two, you need to get probably clearance for that in the first place. Tell your boss and probably get this authorization in writing. Hey, we're doing some hacker research. Some of this is sponsored on questionable, or even might even have to say the word pornographic websites. And so we're not trying to do this, but there may be a pop-up that comes up or some kind of a inappropriate material that will be seen. And so anybody that's a shoulder surfer, beware if you come into my cubicle. And in many organizations, you're not going to get that kind of clearance. You may just have to do that research at home and on your own time. Yes, research. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, also, keep in mind the difference here between overt and covert channels. Now, I don't know why they make such a big deal about this on the Certified Ethical Hacker exam, but you just need to know the difference. They're really obvious, so I'm not even going to write them out fully. Overt is simply a channel that's used for its normal function. So, for example, if you have a website, it's probably going to be on port 80, and any traffic to and from that website could be on port 80. That's overt communications channel. It's being used in the exact fashion that it's designed for. Covert would be using a channel that's against or different than its original intent. So maybe there's port 80 open, and instead of using it to access the website, you are able to somehow sneak through port 80 to exploit a different system or perform some kind of a hack besides just browsing that website. Well, that would be covert. Also, I wanted to show you a quick tip here about changing your MAC address. This is also written out in your Certified Ethical Hacker study guide here, but let me, oh, too big of a window. Let me scroll down here and show it to you. I put it down here at the bottom, and actually it won't be at the bottom by the time you get there because I'm going to probably put some other information in this. I'm sorry about the dancing around there, but it's having a hard time getting the window sized exactly how I want it. But you'll see down here, this is how you can change your MAC address in Windows. This is simply what you're going to do is go to a registry editor, to the key that I specify there, and change your MAC address. And I just decided to go ahead and browse to that location. You can kind of see down at the bottom the path that I took. This is the hard part right here. You got to really, what I would do is when you get this document from me, I would just use the mouse to click across this in that document so you can get this location and then search against it. That'll be much easier. Anyway, once you get into this, the next thing you'll want to do is to find the location that reads network interface. Excuse me, network address, and if it's not in there, then you need to add it in. So also, you need to make sure you get the right one, because look here, I'm at my Realtek PCI. This is my actual network adapter, but some of these others are kind of faux network adapters, so to speak, that we don't actually use for general network communications, like this is SSTP mini ports, VPN kind of things, all that sort of stuff. So here I wanted to just go to the right one, and I'll go ahead and right-click here and choose a new, and this is going to be a string value. We'll just call this network address, and then you have to enter in the value, and so you just put in your fake MAC address then, 00-90-, whatever else it is that it's going to be, and then you're good. I'm going to go ahead and delete that in my case because I don't need that. Also, in order to get it to actually take effect for your current session, what you would need to do is to stop, or rather to disable and then re-enable that network interface in Control Panel, and from that point forward it'll have the fake MAC address. Alright, let's take a look at one of the first levels of threats that we need to take a look at, and that would be rootkits. And what this is going to do is it's going to potentially take control of your system, and that's normally what they do. They're a little bit more destructive than a virus. Viruses are very often visible, and it's very often obvious that your computer has been infected. However, with a rootkit, it's very, very stealthy in many cases, and a lot of times they might sit dormant. Even though you have a rootkit installed on your computer, it might not be a current threat because nothing's going on with it. But they very often will have a built-in backdoor so that at any time, whoever's infected your computer can connect to it, or remotely connect to it, and then potentially be able to fully control it. Very often, rootkits are going to be deployed as what we call Trojans. Now, the lines get kind of blurred between rootkits and Trojans. A Trojan is simply a program that's embedded inside of another program that we would think is useful. So maybe I downloaded a new game off of the internet. It seems useful, it seems fun, I'm playing it, it's great. However, I might not have realized that it was a Trojan, meaning that it had a malicious payload. What was that malicious payload that was a Trojan? It was a rootkit. Okay, so that's where the lines get kind of blurred there. But anyway, they're also very, very stealthy much of the time because they may obscure their presence in the registry, for example. They can do this using a number of different methods, but it might be by some kind of file permissioning that they've done. They may deny access to administrators but allow access to this system, things like this, because a lot of times rootkits will run under system privilege. Also, there may be folders that they've created that are obscured as well, or at least difficult to identify or see. Let me show you an example. I guess I'll just drag over my current window here. This is my documents that I'm working on for this current video. So these are the videos I've currently recorded for this series that you're watching right now. For example, this one right here, that's where I was talking about that TV show I like, the Walking Dead. Okay, that was 02A. Anyway, and there's some slides, some whiteboards that I've been working with. But here I'm just going to go to New. I guess I got to drag this over here a little bit further. New, and then Folder. And then you know how this normally works. You just start typing in the name, right? Well, instead of saying my new folder or whatever it is, one way of concealing this is, first of all, permissions. Another way is you can kind of conceal some of these from the naked eye, so to speak, by using ASCII characters. So, for example, if I just hold down the Alt key on my keyboard and type 0151, then notice that it puts in this kind of strange character. Wow, that's kind of weird. You can't really tell what that is. Well, in this case, it shows up, but in some versions of Windows, this won't show up as anything. You'll see the folder icon, but you won't see anything off to the side. And depending on the ASCII character that you select, it just may not appear there at all. So that's one kind of a rudimentary way of trying to prevent people from being able to see those folders. There's also processes that could become invisible with this as well. Another reason for that is because it may be running, again, as system. Now, there's some Trojans out there, and you might need to know about this for future purposes, if I can be any more transparent than that. But you may have something called the Remote Access Trojan, which pretty much gives a hacker full access control to your computer. And it may show up in Task Manager here. Let me just drag this over. Task Manager. It may appear as DVD Launcher. Now, fortunately, I don't have it, so I guess that means that I don't have that particular item in here. Hopefully, I don't have a Trojan of some type or a rootkit. Anyway, I might not be able to see it. Okay, even if it was running right now, I might not be able to see it at all. Why? Because if it's running under the system account, then I would have to choose Show Processes from All Users, and I would have to have administrative control to be able to show those processes. If I'm just a generic user, I wouldn't be able to do that. So then it might pop up here as DVD Launcher or whatever it is, and I could track it down and identify that maybe that's a rootkit. All right. Now, that's what we've got for rootkits. Very, very dangerous. They very often, again, will be deployed as Trojans, and they're also not only difficult to identify, they're very difficult also at times to get rid of them. Now, let's take a look specifically at Trojans. And again, the rootkit that we just looked at, that could be a Trojan, but it can be in any number of things. It could be a seemingly useful program, but it actually contains some kind of malware. This could be a virus of various types. This could be the start of a worm. This could be a rootkit like we just looked at. Very often this is going to come out as rogue security software, and you may have seen these before. I haven't seen one for a little while. I should have taken a screenshot last time I did, I suppose, but where you'll go to a website and it might be a little bit of a questionable website. Maybe it's one of those that offers wares of various types or free downloads of pirated music and that sort of thing. Those are very risky websites to go to for a number of reasons. Sometimes just visiting the website can get your system infected, but a lot of times there will be a pop-up that occurs and it will say, we've detected 7 viruses on your computer. It could produce your system to slow down or to freeze or to crash or all those sorts of things. And of course, anybody that runs Windows thinks that their computer's full of viruses now. Well, first of all, because even without viruses, Windows does all those things. So it's really easy to get people to click on those. But when they click on the button that says install this antivirus software to clean up your system, it may actually be installing some kind of a Trojan, and who knows what's going to be contained in that. It could be spyware. It could be a keylogger, which is a form of spyware. It could be one of those screen capture things, which just looks at what you're doing on your computer. Some of the older ones will also be able to control certain pieces of hardware. You might have some that will open and close your CD-ROM drive, like a back orifice, which goes back years, but which is still out there. It could be a rootkit, which we just discussed, or a remote control program, where, again, they could have a VNC connection to your computer or somehow remote desktop to your system and fully control everything there. Normally, these Trojans that the hackers use, what we'll do is we'll bind these to a legitimate program with some form of a wrapper. There are a number of different wrappers out there. Elite Wrap is one of them. There's a couple of others. But what you'll do is you'll just take the malicious payload and you'll kind of merge it together with a legitimate program. Let's say, I don't know, Windows Calculator or Notepad or something like that. So the next time you run Notepad or Calculator, it actually unleashes this Trojan. Okay. Often what will happen here is it will also reassert itself via the run key in the registry. So for example, what they might do is they might go into this portion of the registry, and you can see where I'm at right now, HKey local machine, software, Microsoft Windows, current version, and run. And then there's also one of these under the user side, so if you could go to HKey current user, and then the rest of this path should be the same under the user side of things, then you'll see this run key, and here are some programs that will start up automatically. And these are to be expected on most Windows systems. For example, here's IntelliPoint. That runs my trackball that I use to move my mouse around. Okay, so those things are supposed to be running. There's the Adobe Updater, my backup software, certain things I expect to run. But if I'm a hacker and I'm trying to make sure that my Trojan continues to run every time you start up your computer, then I'll put in another value in this as well. This could be done programmatically or through a script, because of course by itself it's not going to be able to right click on stuff, but it could do it through a script of some kind and add additional malicious entries in here that will start up those Trojans or those rootkits. Alright, so that's the other thing that it could do to make sure that it self-propagates and reasserts itself all the time. Also, and this is something I would know for exam purposes as well, just in case, but it may appear as a malicious driver. So in most Windows systems, you'll have /Windows System32 drivers as your driver's location, and then it will be a file that ends in something .sys, and that's a driver files normally end in .sys. Well, some Trojans and rootkits are able to run as these files, and they're just kind of fake driver files, and so you got to watch out for those sorts of things. Fortunately, current versions of Windows are very careful about what's the contents of anything in Windows and in System32. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but Windows file protection goes a long ways towards helping to make sure that these do not get placed in that directory. Alright, now as far as Trojans are concerned, I hope to show you on our next nugget, Remote Access Trojan, which is a commonly used Trojan out there, and you just have to wrap it inside of some other useful program. Once it gets unleashed, you pretty much have full control of the remote computer. There's a really good interface with it and everything. It's really a good product, so to speak, if you're a hacker at least. This may again appear as dvdlauncher.exe. Just know this for exam purposes. There's also one called Poison Ivy. This is what we refer to as a botnet command control center. And this is simply where you might have multiple remote computers here. Let me just draw one. There's a computer, there's a computer, there's a computer. And these are all going to be botnets, which means that you can take all three of these, I'll just kind of draw them all together here, and attack some other machine. Maybe a denial of service attack against this DNS server, let's just say as an example. Well, how do all these computers as botnets perform this denial of service. They may send out invalid pings or ping of death or some other kind of message that this DNS server has a hard time understanding or interpreting, and it could cause a denial of service attack. But to coordinate all of that, you need a command and control center. That's where I was going to talk about Poison Ivy here. And it can connect to each one of these botnets, and then it can give the instructions and when to attack and how much to attack and what kind of an attack and all those sorts of things. So that would make this then the botnet command and control center. Also, let's take a look at a Trojan here that's very dangerous, Banker Fox. Just be aware of the name. And what this one does is it, of course, as you would imagine, steals your banking data. And once it's gotten that, it can just easily log in and transfer your money wherever it wants to, and very, very difficult to get any of your funds back. This is often going to be distributed through so-called free software, although the cost is your entire bank account in reality. But it looks like it's free software of some type. It might be a utility or just any kind of software. It doesn't really matter. It could be coming out through an MP3 file. So you download off of one of these pirated sites, for example, some free music. Well, it just so happens that it also includes Banker Fox, and it steals all of your bank account information. So you get the idea there. Just stay away from that one for sure. Next, let's just be aware of how malware gets spread. Now, you probably are familiar with a lot of this already, so we're just going to be brief with this, but one of the ways you might not have thought of would be shrink-wrapped software. Yeah, you buy it off the shelf at the electronics store, wherever you normally buy your software. It's packaged at the manufacturer. So you take it home trusting it and you install it. And it turns out it may have some kind of malware involved in that as well. This has happened before because of disgruntled employees. This is the most effective way, by the way, to spread malware, because this is one of the most trusted ways to get software. When we download things off the internet, there's already kind of a built-in suspicion, or at least for most of us. But when you get it shrink-wrapped, you usually kind of have a tacit trust associated with that. So if a disgruntled employee also puts in a malicious payload in there, and he or she is able to do so, well, you're going to have a problem. Also, fake programs, as we talked about before, antivirus pop-ups, or this is known as rogue security software, where it says that you've got viruses now, you got to click here in order to clean up your system. Yeah, that's generally known as rogue security software. Internet downloads we talked about before, games, music, screensavers used to be a big one. Still a possibility there that you could have some malicious payload in that. Instant messaging and internet relay chat, or IRC. These are methods where someone could directly be contacting you and attempting to get you to download some kind of a malicious payload. Email attachments, of course, those are always going to be suspect, or links in email. And if you're using HTML email, there could even be a malicious frame inside of one of those email attachments, or one of those emails. Also, the browser and email may have some kind of software bug, and this would be, let's just say this is your email right here, and this is an email message, and this is to, and this is from, and so on. Well, in here, again, if it's HTML, there may be just a tiny dot in there that, number one, when your browser opens this, it may be invisible. This dot might not be visible to the human eye, but it can send out a beacon to a destination over here so that we know now that you have received this email. Now, that's kind of innocuous. That's just so that we can track whether or not our email got there. The malicious part of this is there may be like frames in this, and this would be invisible to the human eye. It would be like white on white, so to speak, so you couldn't even be able to see anything there. And that might have some kind of malicious code built in right there. And then there's also physical access. This is how a lot of the keyloggers have been spread throughout the United States government, and they suspect CENTCON and certain other locations got thumb drives distributed in the organization. People just plugged them into their computers, kind of wanting to know what was on there, and unknowingly spread malware to their own systems. Now, by the way, before I close this whiteboard out, we've talked about email a couple of times here in different places. I want to make an emphasis on this for the Certified Ethical Hacker purpose. The CEH would consider that the most reliable kind of email that you could consider safe would be signed email. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. A close relative of mine has recently had her email hacked. Now, we don't know exactly what happened quite yet. I haven't investigated it yet. But it looks like as if someone got the credentials, and they're also able to go through her address book and so forth. And so programmatically, it looks like they are randomly sending out emails to people that are in her contact list. Okay. Now, if she had signed email and people were used to receiving signed email from her, then her email would be signed using her private key in her certificate. And we're talking about certification authorities here. So it's signed with a private key and then it's read with a public key, and anybody should be able to read it as long as the certificate was initially issued by a trusted certification authority like VeriSign or Thought or one of those other well-known CAs. The purpose of the signing of this means that it can validate that it really did come from her. Okay, so this would be different than someone getting a hold of your account and sending out email under your email account. But if the person actually signs it, there's no way to forge that particularly, and there's also no way to modify the contents of the email and put in some kind of a Trojan or something like this. So the CEH would consider signed email the best way to go there. Now, in practical implementations, I'm not really quite sure that works out because people just open emails. They don't really double check, oh, is this signed? And I need to double check the signature and make sure that everything's fine. You know, first of all, few people use signed email anyway, and people that do are normally in corporations. But I just don't think it's a real practical benefit in terms of preventing the spread of malware. Now, these malware products will conceal themselves many times from your antivirus software. How do they do that? Well, one of the ways is to break themselves into smaller parts. Of course, whoever wrote the virus or the malware is going to do that. So they can break it up into really tiny parts, put it all in zip files, one or more zip files, and then send it that way. And then when you double-click on the self-executing zip file or you reassemble it using WinZip or something like this, it repackages itself into that virus potentially. So this is going to help avoid antivirus products because since it's all in tiny parts, there's no signature on any of that to identify it as a virus. So that's one of the ways they can get by. Also, they could change the virus or the malware with a hex editor. So if this is our malware right now, and it's fully functional right now as a rat or something like that, then if we know that antivirus products have this signature now and they can easily detect it, we can use a hex editor to go in here and put in something very, very simple, just maybe one little small change to it that doesn't affect the functionality of it, but because of that one small change, it will affect the signature of this file, and therefore it might slip past our antivirus products. You can also encrypt it using a hash. Let's say we take this product, this malware, and we run it through an MD5 or a SHA-1 hash. The smart thing to do would be to use the hex editor to change the signature and then run it through a hash to get a unique result, and then use that unique result, which will be some cryptographic data like A5C9QRX, and whatever. And this goes on for a long string of characters, and use that as an encryption key to encrypt this now, and then you can use it symmetrically as well so that it could be decrypted on the destination also. You'd have to package for that, and you'd have to plan for it to be decrypted on the destination, but at least it would evade antivirus software. And then before we're done, let's talk specifically about viruses and worms. And I think you probably know what these are, so I'll kind of be quick with some of this. First of all, a virus is going to be self-replicating malware, and it'll usually attach itself to files. And then when you take those files and you email them to your friends or you send them to your friends or whatever, they'll often get transferred to other computers that way as well. Very often this is going to be in those peer-to-peer networks where music gets passed around. As I kind of mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different malware that can get passed through those pirated websites, but very often viruses are in those things. And the life cycle of a virus pretty much lives forever. Same's true of worms, really. It just lives forever unless there's a date termination that's built into the virus, so that after April 31st, or is there an April 31st? Let's just say April 30th to be safe. After April 30th, the virus self-destructs or deletes itself or something like that. But most virus writers are nowhere near that generous. They want their viruses to live forever, and indeed they do. And what the motive is for these people to write this stuff, who knows? Some of it, especially for things such as the Trojans and rootkits, is to seize control of your system and gain access to your personal data, something like that. But some of these viruses, as you'll see in the study guide, some of them are just hoax viruses, where they'll just change. Let's see if I got some in here. I know I got them in here somewhere, so let me just go. Yeah, all these viruses types in here, like the hoax virus, might not actually even do any damage. It's just a prank, more or less. And then there's these other types of viruses as well. Again, you should read and study those. And then there's also the worms. Now, worms are very similar to viruses, and in fact, in terms of the damage or destruction they cause that might be kind of similar. They're also self-replicating, okay, except that viruses are very often transferred with human intervention. People send each other their latest pirated, music that they downloaded, or the latest pirated video that they downloaded, something like that. Or they put it up on one of those peer-to-peer sites and other people download it. Well, that's kind of a human intervention. Here, it's going to be something that's self-replicating, but it usually does so on its own. That's what makes a worm different there. Again, obviously, it's malware. And these are also usually, but not always, memory resident. They don't really attach themselves to files most of the time the way a virus would. And these can also be possibly resource intensive. One of those reasons is because they are memory resident, and a lot of times they're not written very well. They're very poorly written worm. Oh, if only we had worms that were well written and that followed the guidelines of good code writing. I say that, of course, tongue in cheek there. Also, with these worms, they replicate themselves normally over the network, and that can happen a number of different ways. In a LAN, for example, it can just look for shares that are out there on the network and automatically copy itself to any share. Some of them will copy themselves to administrative shares if they have that capability. Other ones will take advantage of your email system, Outlook, or whatever it is, and it'll just distribute itself to everybody in your address book. And that obviously is a big problem there. That's how a lot of the a lot of the worms have been replicated in the past. And then some other examples of worms would be something like the Conficker worm. I'll just write that out here. Conficker. There's lots of different ones out there in the wild, but this is one that would deny access to administrative shares. And normally, for example, you have $C as an administrative share. Well, it will deny access to that. It'll lock users out of certain directories, all different kinds of things. Restrict access to security-related sites. So these are some problems that come up with the Conficker worm. Also, something that's in common with both viruses and worms here, as opposed to things like rootkits or some of the other kinds of Trojans, is that those things will often conceal themselves and they're very stealthy. Viruses and worms are a lot of times pretty noisy and easy to detect that you've been infected. Also, a lot of times the worms, the purpose of these is to create botnets. So they'll want to replicate themselves to multiple destination hosts so that a command and control center somewhere can control all of the botnets to do something like launch a denial of service attack or something like this. Now then, how do we actually protect ourselves from some of this malware? Well, I got to tell you right from the beginning, sometimes you just can't. Even if you're technically knowledgeable and even if you're a hacker, hackers also do get infected. Sometimes you just can't avoid it. There might be a web page that you go to that it's the first time you've been there and you didn't realize it was a malicious web page. Well, sorry, you just got infected. Or you might have an email that you just opened and read that you thought it was from somebody that you knew, and it really wasn't. A lot of the email scams right now are very, very clever because they'll compromise a user's computer, and then they'll sift through your address book, and they'll send you email from a person that you actually know, but embedded in that will also be a copy of the virus or malware or whatever else it is. So anyway, you can't always protect yourself from it. You can do the best you can, though. So one thing you can do is if you have a new installation of a computer, immediately apply any available updates to the software and to the operating system. So when I talk about that, here's what I mean. For example, here on this Windows Server 2003 server, here we have checked this to keep the computer up to date. So it's going to check for updates depending on our various settings down here. Notice that this is not really all that good. It says notify me before downloading any updates and notify me again before installing them. Well, for the user side of things, most of the time they won't do any of this. They'll just ignore it and they'll say, oh, another one of those things that's going to make me restart my computer, as if I have time for that. So they usually will ignore that. The other option would be to download the updates automatically, but then just notify you when they're ready to be installed, and then you would have to do that. Automatically download the updates and then install them on the schedule I specify. This is the best solution, and you can just specify a time when you're in non-productive hours, whatever works for you here. This is the Windows Server 2003 interface, very similar to this in Windows XP. Vista is a little bit different. Windows 7 is a little bit different. But the basic idea is all the same for the various options that you'll have here. Make sure that you choose this last option. And then if you're in the corporation, that's not really an issue, because Windows Update can be set automatically like I just showed you there, but in the corporation, most of the time you're going to be using Windows Server Update services. And this is what I use, in fact, meaning that when I go to my update settings, I can't change any of this. Why? Because I administratively configured all of this using a group policy object, and it will then automatically apply to all of my clients so that they're going to get their updates every day at a specific period of time, and so on. So this is going to be mandated from on high that all of my users in my domain always get updates. Also, if you're in a small office or a home office environment or a personal computer, just make sure that you use the personal firewall. Now, in corporations, you may have a different solution than this. Sometimes it's a bad idea to mix and match firewalls so that you have both a hardware firewall and intrusion detection prevention and many other things possibly on the network level. And then if you add to that personal firewalls as well, that could make networking very complicated in some instances. There may be some conflicts with it. So you don't always have a personal firewall enabled in corporations, but you can certainly at home and in small offices. So turn that on when you can. Also, you get an antivirus product, a name brand, a good one out there, not Billy Joe Jim Bob's antivirus, which is probably actually some kind of rogue security software. And also make sure you download the latest signatures. You can usually schedule that through the software, and if you have a corporate version of that, you can also do that usually through the corporate version. So you have a single server that downloads the updates and then distributes them throughout your network overnight, for example. Also be sure that when you log on, you use non-administrative accounts, so that if you do log on as an administrator, like you're not supposed to, but if you log on as an administrator, then any viruses or malware that you launch will have your same level of privilege. And so that'll be too high a level for those viruses, and we don't really want that to happen. You can leverage instead the fact that you log on with non-administrative accounts, and when you have something that you want to do with administrative function, you can usually right-click on a menu item like Active Directory users or computers or something like that, and then run as administrator or run as a different user. You can also use user account control, which is available in current versions of Windows. This is where anytime you want to perform an administrative function, it will prompt you with a yes or a continue button. And this is a cue to you that it's about to perform some kind of an administrative function. Now, if you're just running some kind of software that you downloaded from the internet, you didn't expect it to be something that required administrative privilege, and all of a sudden it pops up and asks you for administrative privilege, it could be that there's a malicious payload in there that's trying to run under your credentials. So just be watchful for that. That's the whole point of user account control. And then there's a few other things you can use. There's Tripwire, which is a product that you can download and install, and it will help to detect anytime malware, especially things like rootkits, are attempting to run on your computer. There's also SigVerif. This is a utility that you can run with all current versions of Windows, and it runs through all of the Windows operating system files, and it looks at the signature of all of those files to make sure that they are up to date and that they're actually the Microsoft signed version of those files. That's why it says that, signed versions. That's what it's due, signed verification. There's also Windows File Protection, which always runs continuously. And this keeps an eye out for any changes to operating system files, such as deletions or replacements. And if it's deleted or replaced, it will be able to detect that and automatically replace it from a known good copy of that same file, preventing you from having your operating system files overwritten with malicious copies. Other rootkit detectors you can find from the securitytools.org website. You can see this up here. This is where we also get Nmap, by the way. And this just has a list of several different tools that you can get from sysinternals. One of the good ones there would be Process Explorer. And it'll keep an eye on files and directories that are run by any open process. And so you might be able to see anything that's running there that looks a little suspicious. I've actually got it running over here. Let me drag it over. It's available in a 64-bit version now as well. That's what I'm running here. And you can see that it's just got all the different ones. I'll just go ahead and alphabetize this so that it'll sit still for a moment. And I can just look through this and identify anything that doesn't look like it belongs. You do have to have some education and knowledge about what belongs there in the first place. And if you see a suspicious-looking process, you can also Google for that, and very often there are a lot of websites out there that can identify processes that are benign and processes that are malignant. Also, there's Rootkit Revealer. This is also available from sysinternals. Actually, Mark Rusinovich had created sysinternals, got kind of bought out by Microsoft, and he now works at Microsoft. But another product that he has is Rootkit Revealer, which is very, very good at detecting those hard-to-detect rootkits that would be installed on a system. And in fact, it's now on Microsoft's website. I'll drag that over here as well. You can see on Microsoft has a sysinternals section here, and if you download, you can find it if I keep looking for it. There will be a section here for Rootkit Revealer somewhere. There, it's over here on the left. Okay, Rootkit Revealer, and you can download that and install it, and it actually works very, very well, especially for a free product. And then there's actually a couple of other ones here I'll put on as well. chroot. You can just Google these; they're easy to find. Chrootkit, okay, and then Rootkit Hunter. Rootkit Hunter. Okay, running out of space here, but you get the idea. Chrootkit and Rootkit Hunter, another couple of products you can use, and I would know about those in particular for exam purposes. These ones I'm starring right here. Okay. All right. All right, folks, it's Sunday night, and it's time for The Walking Dead. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this video. Let's talk a little here about what malware is and what we learned. We learned about some various research topics, such as websites that you can go to further your studies on Certified Ethical Hacker, as well as the study guide that I make available for you. We took a look at what rootkits are. Remember, they give you full administrative control over a destination system, and they're very difficult to detect and remove. They're often installed as a Trojan, which is a malicious payload inside of what seems like a legitimate program. We took a look at how malware spreads. Of course, there's the usual suspects like malicious web pages and email. It can also be something where there's physical access or a thumb drive that's left laying around. We took a look at concealing malware. For example, that might be encrypted so that it doesn't match antivirus signatures or hashed. It might also be broken up into tiny pieces, so again, it doesn't match antivirus signatures. And we took a look at how to protect yourself against malware as well. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.